Okay. And we are live. Yay for being alive. And a great big giant hello to Bonni Goldberg, all the way over around the globe in Portland, Oregon, wherever that is. And hi, everybody. I'm Mel Rosenberg here near Tel Aviv in Israel. And I am the lucky person to host the Children's Literature Channel of the New Books Network. And I'm here with the incredible author and educator, Bonni Goldberg. Hey, Bonni,
Hey,
finally,
Mel.
finally
Yes, finally. It was a little difficult.
we
Yeah.
chased each other around the world, and now we're each in our respective homes. And
Yeah.
we are celebrating a book which came out late last year, Doña Gracia. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but
Perfect.
you can, yeah, thank you very much. Muchas gracias, senora. And wave the book around and say everything you want to about it. It's your show.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And yes, I'm very happy, grateful to be able to show you this book, Doña Gracia Saved Worlds. And it is a heart project of mine, meaning that it's something that I was very, very passionate about beyond normal. I think not normal, but beyond just being excited to put a book out. And that's because I am a Doña Gracia fangirl. I think she is one of the most amazing Jewish heroines that we have in our great story, our great Jewish story. And also because this is the very first picture book to introduce her to young people. And I'm so happy that there is something out here. The reason this book exists is because I didn't learn about Gracia until I was an adult, until I was in a mother-daughter bat mitzvah class with my daughter and 9 other mothers and daughters, all of whom I knew and all of whom were amazing women, and some of them really very well educated in Jewish study and Jewish learning, and none of us had ever heard of her when she was introduced. And I couldn't believe it. This is an amazing, powerful woman, Sephardic woman, who saved Jews and who defied kings. And many people don't know this, but she was what I think she might be the first woman, or the first person, I would say, to work on getting a settlement in the Promised Land. And she has an amazing story. She lived in the 15th century during the time of the Inquisition. She was a secret Jew, which was a crypto Jew, and she protected other secret Jews in Portugal. That's where she lived. And then she traveled all around the world in order to keep escaping from one of two things. She was either trying to escape being caught as a secret Jew, or she was trying to escape people, royal people trying to get her to marry them so that they could have her fortune. She was a widow at a very young age. And she was also, when she was widowed, her husband, she married into a very big export and banking family. There were 2 brothers. She married one of the brothers. And then like 7 years later, he died, and he left her half of the whole empire. So that was very unusual at that time for a woman to be given that kind of control and power over her money and also over a business. And she did very well. And then she eventually moved to Antwerp, where her brother-in-law was, and they managed the business together. When he died, even though he was married to somebody else, when he died, he left her the rest of the company. So she wielded a great deal of influence, a great deal of power, and also was, because of that, a big target. So she traveled all over the world, having to escape from one place to another. And eventually she found a haven where she could live openly as a Jew and be safe in Istanbul with the Sultan. where Jews were in the Ottoman Empire. The Jews were welcome to be there at that time, and she settled there. And then her dream was to have a safe haven for her fellow Jews, her fellows, particularly the Portuguese Jews, but just in general. And she leased from the Sultan the Tiberias. And that is where she was planning to create a settlement for Jews, mostly, again, ones that she needed to protect that were in Portugal at the time, but really for anybody. Unfortunately, she didn't live to see it completed, but her nephew did complete it. And for a short period of time, it was a Jewish home in the Promised Land. It didn't work out in the end, but it was the beginning, let's say, or the next beginning. Yeah.
It's a wonderful story. So I'm particularly interested. First of all, I should say most of our watchers and listeners are probably not Jewish, and you mentioned the word a secret Jew. What does that mean in brief?
Sure, yeah. So during a period of time in the 15th century, it was illegal to be anything other than Christian, by which I mean Catholic at the time. And so in Spain, they began to, well, let me back up. There was always some kind of inquisition, and an inquisition is a sort of a court, and their job is to root out anybody that is not faithful to the Catholic Church. And so in order to rid the land of anybody other than Catholics, there was a decree put out that everybody had to become Catholic. You either had to convert or leave or be killed. And so the Jewish community, much of the Jewish community converted, but not everybody who converted was actually seriously wanting to practice Catholicism or didn't care about their Judaism. So they secretly practiced Judaism. It was very dangerous because if you were found out or people were suspicious, they could go to the Inquisition and they could like rat out you, and then the Inquisition could come and do all kinds of horrible things. They could seize all of your property. They could put you in jail. If they put you in jail, they were not responsible for feeding you. That was on your family members. Otherwise, you could just starve in jail. There was torture. There were all kinds of things. And the idea was they wanted to get you to admit that you were, in fact, not faithful to Catholicism and that you were practicing Jewish rituals and practices. And so there was just this whole underground movement of secret Jews, and the different ways that people practiced or hid their Judaism was a big piece of how people lived. And so it was a scary time, and there were some people that just weren't going to give up what they believed in.
And so today in Spain and Portugal, you have many people that have Jewish family names and don't know their history dates back to Jewish families during the Inquisition.
Yes, and we actually have many people in America as well, because the what do you call it? When the decree was made, it was 1492, and so everybody knows that year as Columbus sailing to America. So there was a lot
Who might have been Jewish.
Who very well might have been Jewish, and certainly there might have been secret Jews on that voyage. So there were a lot.
They were the best. They were the best navigators.
They were the best navigators. Yeah. So many people ended up in the Americas, and so there were here areas of all through America, but very much in like New Mexico, Arizona, those areas, but further out as well, that ended up being communities of secret Jews. And it was a very interesting kind of way that they managed to keep things on the down low. For example, sometimes one person in a family, one of the men would become a priest. And so then be the priest for the community, and so would be able to shield people from being found out, but also be able to integrate little tiny bits of Jewish practice into the way that the community was doing their rituals. So for example, we have people who, when you say they have last names that are Jewish, but we also have people who, you go to a wedding and the bride is taken down the aisle by her mother and father, and you're like, oh, and that is a Jewish custom. That's a Jewish practice, that the mother and the father, not just the father, bring the, and they're like, oh yes, this is a tradition in our church.
In our
And
community,
of course, it's a remnant behavior. Like these people don't know that they have Jewish ancestry. They just have these traditions that have come down, and they don't know that they're connected to being Jewish in their ancestors.
And of course, there's many Christian people in America who don't know that Jesus was a Jewish rabbi.
Well, yes,
And,
that's also true, but that's a different thing.
it's a different, and we won't. I'll bring you back to talk about that.
Okay, great. Back to Doña Gracia.
and in Canada, I was forced to pray to Jesus as a 5-year-old, but I wasn't tortured in particular. So I had it off easy. So how did the book come about?
Well, as I said, it came about because of this experience I had with.
No, but I mean, how did you sell it? How did you get Carbon
Oh, okay.
interested?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was a very long process. So I decided that I needed to write it, and it took me a really long time to get it right, like years and years and years. And it's actually a funny story how it happened. I met all the people that I was involved with in the Kidlit community, knew about this book because I would bring it to my critique groups, and I would go to conferences, and I would workshop the first page and talk about it. And so a lot of people knew about it. And one of the people that knew about it is a wonderful teacher and writer and artist in her own right, Mira Reisberg. And I was being an assistant for her in one of her wonderful programs that she used to do. These she runs an organization called the Children's Book Academy, and I was helping her out as an assistant during one of these 6-week classes. And so we looked at the book and we talked about it a lot, and at a certain point afterwards we'd talk, she's a friend, and she was like, how's it going with that, because I really think you're going to be able to find a publisher for that. And I'm like, oh, nobody wants it. And and she said, how many places have you sent it? And I said, I don't know, like 3, 4. And of course, she just was like, she's a good friend, so she could say this to me. She said, I do not want to hear another word about how you can't find a publisher for this book until you have submitted it to 29 places. And you can't talk about it to me until you've done that. Now, I don't know where she got the number 29. You'd have to ask her. But I was like, okay, because I'm really good with an assignment. Give me an assignment, I'll do it. And so I dutifully went and made a list of 29 publishers, and and I sold the book. I did sell the book actually to someone who had seen it in many years earlier in a different iteration. So there were some revisions that happened along the way, and actually more than one publisher made an offer to me. So that also ended up being very surprising. And so finally, after, honestly, 14 years, this book came out, and that was a great, great thing to have happen.
So let's shout out to Joni.
Yes, it was from Carbon, and my editor was the wonderful, amazing Joni Sussman, and who has just retired, and is an amazing champion of Jewish children's books, picture books, and also a real champion of Sephardic stories. And if you make a list of all the books, picture books about secret Jews and the history of Sephardic Judaism, you would see that the lion's share are coming from Carbon. So she really does have a commitment to that. And
a wonderful publisher.
wonderful.
And the in addition to the wonderful text and the story, I have to shout out about the incredible artwork.
Yes,
It's
Alida.
nothing less than incredible.
Yeah,
So
it's really beautiful.
show a few spreads from this wonderful, lovely, gorgeous book of yours.
I will. I will. This is the first spread. And I'll show you one with a slightly different color palette. I love this. Beautiful. Can you see that?
It's incredible. And for those of
Yeah,
you listening to the podcast, you just missed some wonderful artwork. Run out
it is.
and
She's
buy Bonni Alida's book.
Alida Massari is a amazing, amazing illustrator. She really just brought it all to life in some wonderful, wonderful ways. And there's these beautiful, subtle things that she's done. One of the things that I love that she did in this story is, so we have a lot of the story takes place in Portugal, in Lisbon, where Gracia lives, and then she has to leave. And so there are a lot of the motifs that you might see this pattern, and I don't know how well you can see this, but this pattern, I'm sorry for the people that are on the podcast, but I don't know how to quite explain this pattern. You can look at the book. And then when she leaves her home, her dress has the same pattern. And this is the idea that Alida created. This is what's so amazing about having an illustrator. This is where she is showing in the illustration how Gracia is bringing her home with her, that she is taking with her her heritage, she's taking with her her memories, she's taking with her Judaism, and I just think it's just a beautiful way to do something like that. You know, it's subtle, but it just adds this whole other layer and dimension to the illustrations.
And Alida isn't Jewish.
Alida isn't Jewish. She's just really an amazing artist and sensitive and understands illustration. She's not just an artist, although that's certainly plenty to be, but she is a really excellent picture book illustrator, artist, creator, visual creator. I guess we call them that now. And
She
that's
had to do
because, no, go ahead.
no, she had a lot of research to do,
She has a
and
lot of research to do, yes.
and probably no original. Are there any portraits of Gracia? Do we know what she looked like? And in general, where did you get your research? It must have been so difficult.
Yes, and I do want to say about that, there's very, very little. In fact, there really isn't any. There are no primary sources for Gracia. And so a lot of it is what has been pulled together by inference. There is some information about other people at that time and her other relatives, but about her, not really not. She didn't keep a diary or anything like that. And so it is hard.
No photos.
No photos. There's a portrait, but it's not really of her. I think it's actually not her. It's her daughter, maybe. I can't remember exactly who it was, but it's what people use when they show a picture of her or an image of her. It's a silhouette or of her, and yeah. So there really isn't anything of that nature. So I had to rely a lot on the scholarship at the time, what people have already said about her, and it wasn't always that the scholarship agreed about her and what she was doing and what was happening. And so I had to make a choice. I had to choose which version I would use, and don't ask me to
Which version of the truth?
which version of the truth, right? And that is a really important piece to understand, I think, with all historical history, or even historical fiction, but certainly even history and biography. There is a lens and there is a perspective and there are choices that are being made. And one of the important things I want to say about this particular version of her story is I made a really clear decision when I wrote this story, I did not include everything at all. There's all kinds of really kind of important, amazing things about her that I did not include. And I also never in the actual story do I mention the Inquisition. I never call it the Inquisition. I just say that it was against the law to be anything other than Christian. And I made this conscious choice because I really wanted the story to be about her and all the amazing things that she did, much more have that be the focus than why it was she had to do them. I also really wanted to have the opportunity for families to be able to just celebrate a Sephardic Jewish heroine, a woman who is an amazing, determined, very committed with everything that she did to her people without having to talk about the fear and the problems that brought her to have to be this way.
Excellent. So we're going to talk a little bit later about the fiction, nonfiction, historical fiction, historical nonfiction, what the truth is. This kind of drives me Michigan, which is crazy for the people who don't speak Yiddish, but everybody knows what Michigan is, because there's hardly ever a truth, and certainly not in writing. And people say, oh, it has to be exactly only what the person actually said, quoted, and Gracia, we don't have really direct quotes from her, but I applaud you because it's a biography of somebody who has indirect records, and her voice should be magnified, and her story should be told, and you've done such a wonderful job. Now let's talk a little about another heroine of the Jewish community, and that's you. So
Thank you.
So before we do that, so you sold this to Carbon without an agent?
Well, that's a funny story. I did sell it to Carbon without an agent, yes. And then I had an agent that then worked with me and with Carbon, but I did sell it without an agent, yes.
So, and that agent has a name that you want to shout out or not?
Not so much.
Okay. Okay. So are you agented today?
I am not, no.
Uh-huh. Okay. So everybody will make whatever inference they want to, and
Well, let me just say it's a small community and there was no problem involved whatsoever, but it's too complicated to explain. So that's why I'm just leaving it out.
So no animals were harmed in the making of this.
No animals
No.
were harmed, not at all.
Okay. So now tell us about baby Bonni and your childhood and how you fell in love with writing, both as an educator and as an author.
Sure. So baby Bonni, wow. Don't think I've heard that term before. So I grew up in New York City and I have a sister, but I say I was an only child for the developmental years, like until I was 8. So there's an 8-year difference between me and my sister. And I lived in a community that was skewed in a lot of ways. So we were not a religious family. I knew I was Jewish, but everybody was Jewish around me. I went to a private school and with about an all-girl private school, which had about 23 girls in my class, and probably 5 of them were not Jewish. And so I lived in a world where I thought that was, being Jewish was the norm, that it wasn't that we were a small, teeny tiny, itty bitty minority. And again, with no religion, my father was an atheist. My mother was an existentialist. And so I would say we were cultural Jews. My grandparents were very much cultural Jews. And we sometimes went to their house on a Friday night and we had a version of the Sabbath of Shabbat, which really just meant lighting some candles. And that was kind of it. We didn't even eat challah. When I look back on it, there wasn't even challah on the table, but that was how we did it. We also were part of what was called the family circle. So again, this was something as a child, all I knew was that several times a year, which I think was really more like 4 times a year, we would gather with all these other people who were, I was told, were my family members, were distant cousins, this, that, and the other. And the family circle was called B'nai Zalman. So when I would meet these, I would hang out with these young people who were my like third cousins, eighth cousins, I don't know. They were just other kids, and we'd have a good time, and we'd run around. We would be in this private room in this restaurant that doesn't exist anymore called Rossoff's in Midtown Manhattan. And then we dissipate, and I wouldn't see them again until the next time. And this was later found out that this was a group that was established by the families back in the shtetls, or the villages in Russia. And Zalman had 7 sons. And in those days, if you were in those days, people were conscripted into the Tsar's army. And so if they would let you keep your firstborn son. So what Zalman did was, each time a son was born, they would register that son under somebody else's name as a firstborn. And so all 7 sons did not get conscripted, and they all eventually emigrated. And so this thing that we did was sort of the remnants of that family community that would come together, and people would come over and they'd help others come over as well.
You shouldn't be angry with me for what I'm about to say,
Okay.
but you have quite a story here.
Yes.
Zalman's Circle.
Yeah.
I would publish that.
Oh, okay. Well, it is an interesting story. And by the time we were at my parents' generation, so there was a membership, and everybody got together. And again, back in the day, that organization was there to help people who were coming over to get settled and to do what they needed to do, and to sort of pool resources when somebody needed something that was important. But what it had come down to were these 4 to 6 meetings every year, and a grave, an area in a Jewish cemetery where you could have your plot that everybody who was in the family could have, somewhere in New Jersey, I don't exactly know where. And so
you have a circular story.
I do, yes.
And you have a plot. You have to run with this, Bonni.
Okay, everybody, you heard it here. If it happens, you know that this happened right now, and that Mel was the person who made the connection and said, this is a story you have to tell. So we have it on record.
I love it, because I'm Jewish, and I heard of circles, but like, you had a circle. That's incredible. Yes. And then what happened after that?
Well, I grew up and I went off to college, and so I got connected. So again, I had no real connection to anything. I never went to Sunday school. I didn't have a bat mitzvah, none of that kind of thing. And that was okay with me. And I sort of dipped in and out of Judaism different times of my life. And then I got married. Fast forward. And then I got married and had a child. And what I had, I want to just say something. Well, we'll talk about it later, when you said we would talk about what is the truth and what is not the truth, and all the different ways you can tell a story. But the story I told myself when I was becoming a parent was that I really wished that I had had some kind of foundation in my Judaism, not necessarily even religiously, but just like as my community, as a people. And when we moved, my husband and I got married, we moved from Baltimore, which is where I was living. I went to school in Baltimore, and I got my degree, my undergraduate and my graduate degree in writing. So I was already writing. That's a whole nother story, how I got writing. That happened in 5th grade. And we moved here.
Why don't I just block out 2 months, and then we'll talk about everything very slowly. I mean, You have so many stories here.
I have too many stories. I do, and I go all over the
Well,
place.
we'll schedule again. We'll schedule again.
In
Write
any
another
case,
book and we'll find an excuse.
right, right. In any case, we came here and I realized that I wanted my child to have some kind of joyous connection to Judaism very early on. I was not connected at all to like, oh, I didn't have any plan for her. Wasn't something that I wanted to then make sure in the future, anything, just that she had it, that it was there for her. And so we enrolled her in Jewish preschool at a Chabad school, and it was a Chabad school that had a had a preschool teacher who also was she was also trained in a whole other kind of style, not Reggio. I can't remember the name of what it is right now, but so she had this combination of a very loving kind of perspective on how you teach children, and also all of the Judaism, which has all of that as well. So so that was where that started. I also taught at that Chabad school as well on the secular side of the house, writing and literature and social studies. So that was where the sort of reason why this was why I found myself at this mother-daughter bat mitzvah class, and where I learned about Gracia. But always being a feminist and always listening to my friends, who some of whom were teachers of Judaism in synagogues, at Sunday school, that kind of thing, and forever complaining, we don't have enough Sephardic people to talk about, Sephardic heroes. We don't have enough women. And here was this woman, this Sephardic woman, and she wasn't being taught. And it was it seemed so wrong to me. So I had to right the wrong. I like righting wrongs.
Which is a good thing if you're a cultural Jew.
Yeah.
So in one sentence, you were always drawn to writing
I was always drawn to writing.
from the age of 6.
From fifth grade. In fifth grade, I was there. We got our first anthology of poetry. It was called Reflections on the Gift of the Watermelon Pickle. And I just fell in love with poetry. And my fifth grade teacher said one day, oh, there's a poetry contest for children. And that was the first time it occurred to me, like, oh, I could do that. Like, it's not just something other people do. And I tried it, and I wrote 3 rhyming poems, and I entered the contest. And that's how I became a writer.
I like poetry so much I married a poet.
Wow, I didn't know
Well, I
that.
mean that I guess that was one of the reasons. Okay, so but this show is about you, dear Bonnie. So what I'm really interested in is your career as an educator for writers. How did that happen, and what do you teach? What do you have to say to all the children's book writers, particularly picture book authors, in light of your experience as an educator and more recently with your fantastic book?
Oh my goodness, that would take 2 months. But what I mostly would say
You
is
have 2 minutes.
okay. I would say listen to yourself. Listen to what you're doing. Trust that there is a really good reason why you're doing it. And understand that there's 2 ways to be a writer. One is I'll back up. There's one thing that writing is always for, always, and that is for you. There is a reason why you want to tell the story. And the reason is not just because you want to share it with other people. Whatever you're writing, anything, I don't care whether you're a novelist, a picture book, whatever you write, there is a message, there is a meaning, there is a piece of important wisdom for you in the process of writing it. And it's really not going to be finished. When people say, when is it finished? Well, there's lots of different levels of finish, but the first time it's finished is when you understand what the message is for you. And if that is where it ends, if that is, I get it, and it doesn't get shared with other people, that's fine. You are getting to a part of of some wisdom that is important to you. And then if you want to share it with other people, that's when you have to be willing to do whatever you need to do to the piece of writing so that it does for other people what it has done for you. And it may not look and sound exactly like how it looked and sounded, and sorry, it may not be the same material exactly presented the same way for other people, because they're not in your brain and body and soul getting that information.
But isn't that a good thing? Don't we want to have reader response and a multivaried um, a approach to people assimilating your story and making it their own?
Absolutely, if it is a piece of writing that I'm going to take out into the world. Well, I guess what I'm saying is not every piece of writing that I do is going to end up for an audience. And, but some of it is. And I have to be willing, we all have to be willing to make the changes and adjustments and revisions so that that writing speaks to other people the way it spoke to us to inspire us to do it.
Well, my contention, and you're welcome to refute it, is that we write to ourselves, but we write to the place where we're stuck. So I write to the 5-year-old me because I'm stuck there.
Mhm.
What about you, Bonnie?
Well, I write to whatever it is I need to understand, and I don't see it for a very long time. It takes me a long time to see what it is in the story that I need to know or that I need to talk to myself about.
What do you
And
need to know about Grazia?
I think that I needed to know about um, identity and how identity is something that we don't necessarily get to control, and how there are the parts of your identity that other people get to have an opinion about, and there are consequences to that opinion. Now, I'm talking at a very adult level right here, and I do think that children's books also have a whole adult level. This is one of the things I adore most about children's books, writing children's books, is that you have the children who are, of course, the most important audience, but there's also the adults who read the story to them sometimes over and over and over again. And they are also hearing something that is hopefully in some way getting integrated into their way of looking at things. And so from an adult perspective, that is why I think that Gracia was so very appealing to me. And also because I felt like her remnant Jewish culture, this idea that we have these remnant Jewish traditions, felt a little bit like, in some ways, that in certain communities, what modern Judaism is, or cultural Judaism, that we take these bits and pieces and we have them, and they come from a big, long, deep tradition with many, many layered, and we don't necessarily have to know all those things, but we hang on to them, and they're very important to us, and sometimes we can't even articulate why.
Well, I've known you all of 35 minutes, and it seems to me that there's a parallel story that I didn't know about your life, but Bonnie as a marvelous educator, talking about Judaism and coming back to a need for learning about and sharing your Jewish roots. There's there's a parallel message with the secret. You were a kind of a secret Jew in a
Yes.
sense.
Well, and when I talk about it as being a secret Jew now, but really how it was about being hidden. It's about this, we hide parts of ourselves, and sometimes we do that for out of fear, but sometimes we do it to protect ourselves, but not because we're afraid, but just because we want to, we want to keep something close. So yes, I think there is something about coming back around and what it takes, that it's a journey to go from one place of a relationship to your identity in one way to another relationship to that identity, and also living with the reality that whatever your identity is, whatever your hidden or secret or quieter identity is, that when it is shared, there will be people who will take that identity and celebrate it with you, and there will be people who might want to use that identity in ways that are not for your benefit or for the benefit of the community. And I think that's a world we live in now. I think we've always lived in a world like that, all of us, everybody with any identity. And that, I think, is a very contemporary and also sort of a timeless kind of journey and struggle, and that we are all heroes of our stories and of our determination and capacity to embrace our identities.
This is all very interesting to me because, when you say cultural Jew,
Yeah.
so I never thought of it, but part of the reason that I left Canada and came to Israel when I was 17 was anti-Semitism. It's not so nice when your next door neighbor asks you why you killed Jesus.
Yes, it is not very nice.
And but part of the reason I came to Israel is because I didn't want anybody to tell me what kind of Jewish person I wanted to be. And
Yes.
so I'm a cultural Jew, probably much the same as you. I go to synagogue half an hour a year. There's
half an
traditions.
hour a year.
That's not a religious year. I go to hear Kol Nidre, and people don't understand what it is to be Jewish because they're not Jewish. Judaism is much more than a religion. It's
Right.
it's much more than a culture. It's a peoplehood, and it's very hard to explain. We're not going to talk too much about own voices, but I will ask you. There are some Jewish people that I've spoken to in the States. I'm not going to talk too much about the terrible ordeal we're going through these days of stupid hatred, completely unfounded. But I am going to ask you, do you think that there aren't enough children's books that deal with Judaism? In other words, is there a need in the greater community telling people what a great culture it is and how important it is for Jewish people to give and to contribute to the betterment of the world? Do we need more books like that?
Well, let me ask you what you mean by that. Do you mean, do we need?
You're interviewing me now. That's
It's
a
a
very Jewish
conversation,
thing.
isn't it?
No, it's a very Jewish thing to answer a question with another question.
It is a very Jewish, yeah. So I think that I think we have more. Well, we're in a very weird time right now, right? So in this very moment, we have an issue with Jewish books being published because there is a larger public anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism doesn't really go up and down at all. I think it's pretty much stays at the same, but there are more public, there are incidents that happen and then it becomes more out there, right out there. And
more
so
overt. And
right.
and I have to agree with you. I left Canada because of anti-Semitism, and I've been saying for 50 years it's an anti-Semitic country. People say, "Oh no, Canada," and look how bad it is now. So I agree with you. I'm agreeing with you too much. We have nothing to argue about. So let's find something now to argue about because our time is running out.
Okay, but just to answer that question, I think it's always wonderful for there to be more books, Jewish books, stories about Jewish culture and Jewish experiences and Jewish joy. And I think that's part of why I didn't want to write a lot about what was moving Gracia to have to do these things, but more just about how amazing she was, because I think that we are a culture that can get very caught up in our story in the part that has to do with the suffering and the anti-Semitism. And that I am going to get this out before we end. So when you talked about my story, when you talked about telling a story, I really do kind of embrace the Jewish poet Muriel Rukeyser, who said in one of her poems, "The world is made up of stories, not of atoms." And I actually think it's made up of both, but we tell stories and the stories are what are important. The truth is in the story. It is in what you bring over to somebody else. And I think getting too caught up in the details of what what actually happened, when what actually happened is just a perspective on an event or on what somebody said, an interpretation, a perspective, we lose sight of the importance of the messages and the importance of our heroes and our leaders, and what they represent, rather than necessarily every detail about who they are.
As an ex-scientist, I want to lean over and give you a great big virtual hug for that. Because I've been saying that for many years. Truth is something that's so, maybe God knows what truth is. I certainly don't, and I spent 30 years as a scientist. But I was at a conference of children's writers here in Israel, and one of the important editors said, a story of fiction has to be true. And I said, "Oh my goodness!" I wrote it down. I came to her at the recess, and I said, "Do you know that you said that?" And she says, "Yes, of course. Fiction is also a kind of truth." And I went, so I think that we are storytellers at heart, and this is Noah Harari has said this in his book. We're humans because we became storytellers, and that separated us from the other primates. Yuval Noah Harari, and I completely ascribe to that. And a good story that rings true is true. At least I think so.
Yes, I would agree. And I when I teach this often. My little quick story about that is I had a student, we were workshopping her piece, and in the story, something terrible happens, and then the main character, this couple drives by, and they end up taking the main character and and taking care of her, and we all were like, that doesn't work. And she said, but that's what actually happened. Like, this is based on my life, and that is actually what happened. And that's when we had that moment. It's like, sometimes what happened doesn't give you the truth of the story, of what you're trying to communicate. And at that moment in the pacing of the story, it doesn't work to have somebody come and rescue the main character. And so, yes, to get to the truth, we can't always rely on what actually happened.
This is incredible. I have not been able to differ with you, in 45 minutes. I'll give you one more opportunity.
Okay, go for it.
Are you a Leonard Cohen fan?
I am a Leonard Cohen fan.
I guessed you were. His best poem or song would be what?
Oh, no. I pass on that one. I'm not
No,
gonna.
you can't. You cannot
I
pass.
can.
No, you cannot. You can pick one and change your mind.
Okay, well, I'll just go with Hallelujah then.
Okay. See, we beg to differ already, you see.
I don't think that's his best. I couldn't even tell you the names of all of his music, but he was a poet, and a wonderful one.
Absolutely. And let's have another shout out for your wonderful book. Time to wave it around again.
Wave it around. And also to say, on my website, there are a lot of free resources, activity sheets, curriculum, all kinds of things, because I am an educator, and because I can't just put something out and not be able to share ways to enrich the experience of reading the story with the young people that you're going to be reading it with. So I hope you'll take a look at those things. They really are free. You don't even have to give me your email address. You can just download them. So please do take advantage of that.
And I will say that I think it's an important book for people who are not Jewish as well, to have a glimpse at a Jewish heroine who lived 600 years ago, approximately, and was a suffragette half a millennium before.
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to say something really quickly too about it. The title is called Doña Gracia Saved Worlds. And the reason that is the title is because there's a Jewish belief that says that and every person is like a whole world. And if you save even one person, you have saved a whole world. And so this is one of the messages of the story, that we are all whether you're Jewish or not, each person is like a whole world. We have a whole world inside of us and generations that come from us and that are impacted by us. And I think this is such an important message these days, no matter who you are, that we are all each a whole world. And when we protect each other, when we save each other, when we help each other, we are helping to preserve and protect whole worlds, whole stories, whole important truths that we all need. We are all important in the bigger story.
Wow. I want to add another thing to that.
Okay.
So I think that people who have this wonderful 1 in 1,000 opportunity to have a traditional book published as you have, with a marvelous editor and marvelous illustrator, Alida, and 25 years from now, there will be some people in the world who've grown up, but they were 5 when your book came out. And your book had an effect on these people. And I think that as authors of picture books, usually we don't make very much money. We end up usually losing money. It's not for the money. And we're not saving worlds. But you know what we are doing, maybe, Bonnie, if we get very, very lucky, is we're kickstarting the creation of a young person's world.
We certainly are planting seeds. And I think that all of us, whether we're writers or whatever we do, we are always planting seeds for other people. The nature of those seeds can be really positive. They can be not so positive, but this is
they can be bad seeds.
They can be bad seeds. And we don't know if they grow or not. And I think that is how we stay humble in the best sense of the word, and how we are also knowing that our life has meaning without having to have it be proved to us. From generation to generation, we plant the seeds, we plant the trees, we plant the seeds, and we leave it hopefully better than we found it. And that is fulfilling and meaningful. And we do it in community, which is also really important. No book gets written in isolation. It is all about any book, anything that comes out is a collaboration, and hopefully a beautiful collaboration.
So Bonni Goldberg, you have created a circle today for the New Books Network. And I am part of your new circle here. So what I'm going to ask you is we're going to say goodbye to everybody, and then I want you to come back into the Zoom and we'll just have a little tete-a-tete to sum up. And I know we didn't talk about everything, but I know you're also working on new stories. And Emir Hashem, as the Jews say, you'll have a new book out soon, and we'll be able to talk about that. And we haven't talked about your other books on Shabbat and Jewish holidays, and we'll leave that for next time because we've kind of run out of time. So on that very, very happy note, I'm Mel Rosenberg, and I'm the host of the Children's Literature Channel of the New Books Network, and I've been celebrating a wonderful new book, Doña Gracia Saved Worlds, written by the most marvelous Bonni Goldberg, and thank you for being part of our journey today. Be well and do good. And Bonni, we're going to say goodbye to everybody. Run out and buy this gorgeous book, Carbon, and we're going to have a little secret tete-a-tete.
Thank you so much for having me. I really love what you do, and I appreciate the chance to connect with you.
It's been all my pleasure, dear. Bye, everybody, before we get soggy and spongy here. Bye, everyone.